So the question, I guess, is when we start discussing is that what can and should we do as scientists? What is our role really in trying to get our neighbors interested and concerned without feeling that they lose their livelihood or their inspiration to be humans, which from our point of view is not a bad thing to be. So getting politics, getting non-governmental organizations, getting finance, as you were talking about, getting businesses, getting our enemies and friends to sit down and discuss these things that we conveniently call wicked problems. It's kind of easy if we say this problem is a wicked problem, so we can discuss it for a few centuries and see what happens. Problems are there to be solved, and then when we call them wicked, it just means that they are harder to solve than other problems. So I think what I would hope from everybody here is, the five of us here, of you, is that you would give a really brief statement each of, let's say, one thing you have learned from the other speakers today, one open question maybe, or something you feel is a highlight. And then we'll see where it goes, how we can integrate the audience and ourselves in a brief discussion. So Magnus, you were first of you speakers this morning, so maybe you have had more time to listen than the others. A couple of minutes.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Erik. I have 3 potential reflections, so I need to choose carefully now.
You can take 2.
Oh, I can take 2, thank you. Okay. So I think there are 3, but I will go into 2. I can go into, I'm negotiating here now, okay. Successfully, yeah, exactly. Okay, so the first one deals with disciplinarity, I think. I think what we've heard here today is that we have moved away from single issues to nexuses. And we're moving away from looking at system from a precise perspective to a more blurry perspective. There are blurry boundaries. And that, I think, is leading to the conclusion that there's no single discipline who can actually address these big challenges alone. So that's my first reflection. My second has to do with, can you hear me, by the way? Yeah, okay, good. The second one has to do with scale. And we've been talking about that quite a lot, actually, without actually saying it. So, and particularly cross-scale interactions. We need to comfortably move between scales, the local, the regional, and global, and back again. So I think that's very important. Thinking about evolutionary perspectives, for instance, where we have these threshold effects, but at a shorter time scale, if you cut out just a piece, you will observe it as a linear change, right? So getting the perspectives right. And then there's a paradox that we haven't addressed, I think, and that is things that we do at a local scale. We need to look at that at an aggregated level, because otherwise we may increase and promote diversity locally. But if we do it in the same way all over the place, it will lead to homogenization at a global scale. So I think that's important. We see it in food and food preferences, we see it in technologies, and we see it in strategies. My third and last reflection has actually to do with biodiversity. And we've been talking about that at a cellular up to the at cellular level to the global biosphere, which I think is just amazing to have these conversations. And I think it's also important, and I will soon leave the word, that we think about that diversity in terms of how, it's important for resilience, it's important for coping with change, but that biodiversity is also the raw material for the future, and the raw material for innovation and renewal and potential transformation. So that's my 3 reflections.
Yeah, thank you. And I think one of the things that you implicitly then said is that the system is not static anyway, so we need to cover all these different scales, be they human or natural or physical. Yes. Thank you. Those were, I think, very valuable reflections. So we just continue and go to you. From a satellite perspective.
Okay, I could then continue with the scales. Yes, I think scales were exactly what we were hearing without actually saying it, as you also mentioned. We were talking about microbial phenomena all the way to the global things, and with the temporal scales from instantaneous effects to really like hundreds of thousands of years of development. What is related to the topics here, I think, is that we have huge amounts of information and data, models and things that are relating with different phenomena, everything together, and they are all interlinked, which was several times here mentioned, that these are perhaps wicked problems if we want to consider them as problems, but phenomena are linked, and we are crossing borders in many ways. So the question is how to combine all the information that we have so that we can start understanding better and perhaps making solutions to these problems. And I have a background in applied mathematics, so my approach is then that we start putting it all together. And I think we should be very open to all types of methods here, and also use different types of methods, including now the AI opportunities in like boosting data fusion, which might be otherwise very complicated. And I think that we could continue the work with the iterative approaches, simply doing something first and then trying to upgrade it step by step to more fancy and more general methods. So
yeah, thank you for pointing out the connectivity issue. I think it's really important, and for an ecologist working with food webs and food web networks in time and space, it's particularly important because it's so easy to neglect key components, and by linking things we can certainly try to do that. So thank you, and now I will jump to, I think, Stina, because she spoke before you, Eva, so you have a chance to reflect, Stina.
Yes. Since I retired a couple of years ago, I have had too much time to follow everything in Finland and in the world and reflect about it and so on. So sometimes I feel very frustrated, but now here, I think it was fun. It was good to listen to all of you and what you have said so far, both of you. I think that was really excellent. And what I maybe wanted to add to my session was to have the human perspective, because I'm a microbiologist, so I've been working with microbes all my life until 10 years ago. I became the Swedish professor in sustainable development, so I had to learn what is sustainable development and so on. And then I always thought that we have to do this together with other people, and this is why in my session now I had also people and in food production without the people, I think, would not have been the same. So Eeva told me that she didn't realize until today maybe that this is the bioscience section of a society, but I think that, yes, I know, I said, but I wanted to bring the people here and the humans as well. And what I have found in every speech and discussion is of course the communication, and I think this is what we are sort of thinking. How can we communicate what we have come up to today? How can we generally communicate to the society and to different groups what we want to say? Because we know a lot and we have a lot to say, but how to say it? And now when you think of how news are going, it's 2 minutes news, and I know my children are journalists, so I know how they work. It should be very short, it should be very small, small text only, because there's no time for deeper things. But so then I was thinking that if we should do something concrete, can we make a statement from this seminar today. The society, in the name of society, but I don't know what it could be there, but something that these wise people here have come up with. I think it would be good to make it and then to have Nadine send it around to the different news media and to other instances as well, because at least that would be, it would maybe we would get some publicity. Yeah, so this is my suggestion.
Yeah, thank you. That's important. We have had one member from media here all day, and I know that you have been listening a lot and learning, and in this, yeah, and I was going to say, in this way you work a little bit against snuttifiering, which I think is really good, because we always need the chance to reflect as well as listeners and readers and so on, and in a way I didn't really think about us putting out a written statement somewhere, but that's something we could reflect on, because it then needs to go back to all speakers to see if they are okay with it. But somebody else asked me, I think you, Vineta, said that we could maybe make a kind of a summary. So let's see where it goes. Summarizing discussions and thoughts is never easy, but it's always a positive challenge. Eva, now we go back to you.
Okay, yeah. So thank you so much. It's been really exciting also from my side. And now when I'm thinking, one of the issues was really that, of course, I knew this was actually a science, but I didn't really even think about it, that we should somehow come only here with strictly natural science issues. But what struck me was that at some point I remembered that we were supposed to discuss about adaptation. And I missed the first part because I was not able to come here till 10. But all the talks that I heard, Mikael was the only one who was actually talking about climate change adaptation as such. Most were talking about other ecological issues and not about adaptation, but it was so inbuilt there that actually it just came out. But I remember 15 years back when you talked about adaptation, it was very strict. Here is mitigation, here is adaptation. And so I think that is a little bit like you mentioned, that I tend to call it that we are living in a messy world. And this has been very difficult for scientists to actually accept the fact that you need to do research in such a way that you don't get some kind of end result, but you get maybe to some kind of paths or directions which are maybe leading to the right direction. And this is also something that was very refreshing, that kind of things came out here. About this, your question at the end, Mikael, Erik, about what you posed to Mikael was quite interesting, that what to say to the policymakers, because I thought we have in a way passed that kind of way, and now coming back to Kristina, so I would rather say that we should go and talk with other parts of the society as scientists, and we should not see that we are any better than the rest of the society. I would say that the investment sector is doing at the moment really big loops, and that actually government is doing quite, I hope they don't hear me, they are sleeping, but investors, businesses, farmers, some of them are doing really big loops, and these leverage points, which are kind of places where you can jump, are really important, and those are the ones we should in a way find that where you go up. But I would just encourage everyone to, if you are interested in doing science that has an impact a little bit, not maybe to do the path dependency, which is a problem. That means that you in a way are so strictly connected to your old, but use your scientific capabilities and do rather something that the society needs at that moment. And so we are in a way talking about these things, what policymakers are stupid or someone else, but actually we are, if we are not able to make the change that the society needs from us scientists, we are just actually taking the same, where the graph that I showed is going down. We are really feeding into that. But the positive thing was in this report that actually one of the only positive things is that the amount of science on sustainability has gone up, and that's a very positive signal.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's a crucial thing, and when we talk about proactive or reactive, it seems now that society kind of outside politics in a way is raising issues and doing something about them, and then politics lag behind. And if we now look really close, we look at the government in the country next to us, where Magnus comes from, and the country where we all live at the moment here, we have governments who are not, they haven't profiled themselves as environment friendly, if I would put it mildly. But then on the other hand, if they team up with business, and if they realize that problems are they cross borders, and they accept that humans also have to cross borders to solve problems, then we are a bit on the way. So I fully agree that communication is an important thing. And how to train a scientist to become a communicator is not an easy thing, as we all know who have been in the business for some time, because decision makers do not want to hear about problematic cures.
Can I just say a small?
Of course.
I didn't say that they should communicate. I said they should co-create.
Good. Okay.
That's
yeah,
a different
that's a
thing.
different.
Yes.
I agree.
We don't go there to learn. I think
No.
we heard from Mila that we shouldn't go to learn or
No.
to teach, but do it something together.
Absolutely. Thank you for correcting me. That's fine. Mikael.
Yes, thank you. After these statements, it's a bit challenging to find something to say in addition, but I've leafed through my notes and thought a lot about what has been said today, and I think one unifying thing that also came partly implicitly but often explicitly was the idea about pathways to some vision, and I think that's an important thing to revisit, because pathways, it's easy in a way to paint vision, but the difficult is to find the pathways, and pathways deliberately in plural, because there is not like one path to be found, but there are many, and you can then take, well, say like my namesake Mikael mentioned, leave half the world untouched. What do we actually mean by that, and how does that translate into pathways where, which was also implicit in some of the presentations, the dignity, the fairness, the justice is also realized, because if that's not identifiable, then you can't find the pathway. And that links to many of the points raised on the knowledge that is needed. What knowledge do we need, and the scales? Because like a friend of mine who said that, well, if I'm going from here to, say, the Senate Square, I can happily assume that the world is flat. But if I'm going to New York, I hope that the pilot doesn't abide to this theory, but recognizes the complexity. And I think that's also the challenge for researchers, is that we shouldn't bring in too much complexity when there are fairly straightforward steps to be taken, because then that is one of the most effective ways to block any pathway, is to say that we need more knowledge, we can't do anything.
Yeah, that's a good point. One of the things I have been a little bit worried about when it comes to environmental science, Baltic Sea science in my case, and also in general climate aspects and sustainability issues, is that since governments and EU politics tend to have a time lag which is quite long, and then there has been a certain annoyment with scientists speaking kind of a old-fashioned Greek between themselves, and then people not understanding that people from a scientific perspective, outside world, in other words, people from business or whatever, they read in on something, okay, I can fix eutrophication, I'll put in 30 million euros here, and then I call the Prime Minister who says, okay, fine, let's do it. And then there is this, that sometimes it works the other way, that the scientists are kind of left in between. Because these people always get the media attention as well. It's really easy for them to get media interested, billionaire so-and-so who sells cranes in Singapore or whatever. They are more interesting to the media than is a benthic ecologist from Ekenäs in my case. So there is this collaboration and communication. I think we need all of this, and so it's an intertwined system. Now we have a little bit time, and we have several people here. We hope that someone else than those who have already spoken so much might have a point of view. Then we will find time for you as well. Yeah, Holger. I was actually expecting that we would get a historian view already earlier, so thanks.
Is it on now? Okay, thank you. My name is Holger Weiss. I'm professor of history at Oberacademie. I'm doing global history and African history. It has been very stimulating to listen to you all, and I've been thinking now for the whole day that kind of what Dipesh Chakrabarty in his last book kind of challenged me as a global historian is to kind of move from global history into planetary history, which of course means that we need to have a kind of new historical thinking also. But now listening to you is kind of, I would challenge you is that what I see as key problems from me as kind of now thinking planetary historical terms is that are you more addressing how to fix symptoms and avoiding causes? In the sense that when I go back and see that and looking at all the charts where we see either the takeoff of the great acceleration in the 1950s or then the 1750s or then the Radiman thesis 8,000 years ago. Doesn't matter, is that are we addressing kind of, especially when we look from 1750 onwards, a way of kind of life that we in the West have started to use to the rest that we do not want to change. But we are trying desperately to find solutions of not changing our ways of life, but kind of letting the others in one way or other. And I think the problem is, of course, here, and I also think that finding solutions, and I've kind of been very disappointed of looking at myself since 1972, since the Club of Rome and the Stockholm Conference, these issues have been up on the political table. And now, of course, we as scientists can say that we do not have much more time left. But we have already used 50 years and more to think about these things. Is it a problem that, yes, we do think globally, but the political structure that we have is still thinking on the Westphalian kind of structure that we created in the West in 1648, where we kind of, for the last, let's say, since 1945, are trying to think a little bit more globally, politically. But it has been very difficult to kind of move actions from the kind of territorial kind of container up, where we, as scientists, see that we have to think beyond the borders. But it's really difficult of kind of changing things, because I mean we all know that it's kind of, are we bringing forward solutions to problems that we see now and we have seen for 50 years, or are we trying to change? And I'm not quite sure whether we are trying to change.
Good question. Are we looking at the causes or consequences, and how are we tackling them? And you seem to be eager to respond, Mikael.
Well, I think the answer, unfortunately, is it depends, and by that I mean that we can't although we would identify the root causes and develop solutions, we can, as you say, the inertia in systems is such that you cannot only solve the root causes. You have to get the pathways, and that means inevitably that sometimes it's about addressing symptoms in order to get this sufficient kind of momentum to actually achieve a change. And sometimes it's the change happens, and that's of course the lesson of transition research, that sometimes you manage to get innovations that actually then break down the system and the change comes along, and in other cases it's virtually impossible to get the change going. Sorry for not.
You wanted to add on to this?
Yeah, maybe I could take it from another perspective. I could have also answered the same, but about this idea, the whole thing that what we are really needing is maybe what you look from the historical point of view is this cultural transformation, where in a way, how you see that, are you looking at what you are losing, or are you looking at what you might gain? So it very much puts the weight also on looking into the future, and I would claim that we are not looking far enough, sort of imagining. There was someone, was it Kristina or Milla, that was talking about this issue of that you need in a way to have the possibility to look and take risk and look quite far, but have this understanding that we don't need, we maybe know that the future is not positive to all, but we need to have a positive image to be able to make this kind of thing. And then comes this Mikael's issue that we need to, in a way, focus on these societal things and not on the natural science things. So really the impact should be on these root causes, which are the societal things and not the natural things, but the cultural transformation, and show that that has been done before, and in a way build on that is I think one way of changing the cultural thinking or the historical thinking for to the future's direction.
Thank you. And Magnus, you wanted to pitch in on this as
well?
Yes,
because I think it's a very simple and yet very awkward question, and it's a very relevant question, I think, because it's difficult to answer. And you're spot on. Are we changing? And maybe we could rephrase it a little bit instead of looking at the root causes and the symptoms, and talk about adaptation versus transformation. Because sometimes that's difficult to know if we are actually adapting to the situation and we think that we are changing, but we are just reinforcing the current state that we're in, rather than being novel, innovative, bold, and find other pathways. And the question is, of course, how do you make people choose that path? I mean, we've been talking a lot about how can you build a model, a conceptual or a practical model, that when you present it to people, they will look at that model and say that, of course, we should use that model, because the old one is not modern anymore. It has so many, problems with it, and your model is so much better. How can we build that model? So 2 different aspects. I think the attractor, the new model, and whether it's an adaptation or transformation we're looking at.
Yeah. Thank you. One moment. I was thinking, in a way, you were challenged with your 50% saving of the world for those. Do you think it's doable? And now we're talking again in a time perspective as well.
Thank you. So no, I just grabbed that out of the existing discourse.
Of course.
I mean, a bit more than 10 years ago, I was involved in a study where we did explicitly link this idea from systems theory to the fossil record, and we published a paper called Approaching a State Shift in Earth's Biosphere. But it's not my field, and I don't want to speak about conservation or managing the biosphere. I think 50%, first of all, has been understood as already well into the risk zone. In that line of thinking, it should be much, we should leave much more than half alone. But what that actually means in terms of, let's say, urban rewilding or novel methods of agriculture or all sorts of ways to soften the impact without imagining half the planet sort of fenced in and made unavailable is, I think that's at the heart of our challenge here, actually. So,
yeah. No, I tend to agree. I mean, we cannot fence in things even if we have deer running on our summer cottage eating everything, and we end up fencing in everything anyway, symbolically. But that's very valid. Conservation biology, as it's being called, is not an easy thing because systems are dynamic. There were two more comments, three more. I think we go, Moira, you, and then we take the gentleman after them. Yeah, you guys have asked so many, so you hjälp Moira den och så får John och Dan sen och sen är det slut.
Yeah. I just want to thank you for this discussion because I find it new to be in a situation where people actually, the presenters, and I say all the presenters today, recognize the human being as part of nature in a very real and true way. And therefore, I think the interesting question that Holger asked is in a way irrelevant to this group, because what I hear you say is that you try different ways for us to behave and to transform ourselves, and not only ideas like such as I thought from my perspective of education, that we should think, how can we change humanity? But I realize that today that we cannot change humanity, but what we can is really to have this ongoing discussion and go home and think, is there something I can do differently? Because we are all part of this percentage high up. So I need to rethink the position of education in the whole work that you guys are doing, and just thank you for letting me be part of it today.
Thank you. Yes, we haven't discussed the educational aspects, and I think it's important that we consider them all the way through, from kids to retirees. Now we have two more comments. Please.
Yeah, well, I have actually a question. I think it's going to all of you, but starting from, I think it was Eeva Furman who said, talk with society. And you said the investors are doing a great loop. That sounded very interesting. And then I think I connected it also to Magnus said that, speak with the big actors. So I wonder if that's the investors. So speak with them. And he mentioned Cargill, which is this kind of, who's really have a very big effect on sustainability in the whole world. And then Mikael said that make it more straightforward. So my question is really, should you sort of go and speak with these, Cargill, the investors, and say that you speak about this kind of responsible investment and like in the name of, the self-interest even in the Cargill and the other ones, like make them more accountable, make it like publicity. And do you think this is one way the scientific society could demand sustainability, but maybe in a way, kind way like Eeva said, discussion, they're doing a good job, like also in a constructive way, but like, is it too idealistic what I'm after? Do you see this is a way to speak with the big actors like directly and in the name of science? It's a little bit like Is my question simple enough?
Well, yes.
The question.
So, response. Mikael.
I think definitely, I mean, it's also unavoidable, and certainly the big actors speak very strongly in the places where decisions are made. So they are certainly there. I think the challenge for society is partly encouraging those actors, and that's what's happening in say, the rules for sustainable investment and so on. But one important point to be made is that these big actors also do need, and society needs, rules. There was a question about, can you rely on these green cards and whatever? I think we are, for example, in the carbon offsetting, in a situation where the problem is precisely that the rules aren't there. There are lots of snake oil merchants of various labels and so on, but in order to be believable and marketable, they actually do need the rules of society. And this is where the communication comes in. You need to talk to the big guys, but you can't transfer the responsibility from society to the big actors.
Yeah, and Eeva, and really briefly, because then we have one more and then we're wrapping up.
No, I would just say that we really need action from everyone, and what Mikael said, I like to call it usually orchestration, which includes these really tough legislation, regulation, but then also coordination, but especially in between, in a way to bring everyone together, but everyone needs to be, media needs to be there, and the investors. And so they, in a way, control each other, and this way it can go forward.
Thank you. Dan, you had something really brief.
Yeah, maybe I'm listening to all your wise guys and coming, thinking that what we have learned today. And one thing that was mentioned many times is communication and how to get through this message, because we still see in the society, especially at some individual levels, we see a neglect. I mean, we see that people don't understand, that they want to understand. So denial in some things that, and think about, for instance, when of course the gasoline prices in France, I mean, Macron wanted to do something and there were big strikes and they had to take it back. And now we see that maybe in the new government in Sweden that we actually going in a negative trend, you might say that. And so, I mean, how to still, I mean, how do you see that you really can, I mean, talk to the ratio of the human being? We are invading race, of course, but I mean, we have also a psychology, and we have a brain to think and to we talked about the synapses. I'm coming from the field of neuroscience, so, and you can see in many cases that people really don't understand this interconnection between the different. So I actually liked very much what Johanna said about trying still to do, because all of these different boxes of interdependence can be, there could be some actually interesting thing coming up if you really looked with them without prejudices, and see that what kind of solutions can come from them for the psychology of the thing, from the neuroscience, or then from the natural science, or from some data, from some big data. So, but coming back to this, maybe Magnus, you could first start, because in Sweden there is a saying, "Det ordnar sig." Det vi klarar det. So I wonder how can we actually manage this? How do you see that?
I mean, it's a complex and a highly relevant question. But if asking me on the spot, if we're talking about the broad public, I would not invest my time in trying to convince those that have deeply decided about their reality. I would go for those that are on the breach to go there. Because I think that we will need like a pamphlet of things. Some people will need to feel fear. They will have to experience bad things. There's a study, for instance, from the US when they compare Democrats and Republicans. So Republicans, because by some reason it became very political to wear a mask during the pandemic. And the Democrats, they weren't very political about it. It's like, let's wear masks and that's it. And people who got sick from the COVID, being a Democrat, they didn't change the behavior very much. But if you were a Republican and you refused to wear a mask and you got sick from COVID, their response, the pendulum, was extreme to the other side. So they really spoke for mask protection afterwards. I didn't see that one coming, kind of.
Thank you. We only have a couple of minutes left. I was wondering, Stina and Johanna, did you have something you wanted to add to this? Or are you?
I could add something. I'm not sure if it adds to this, but perhaps one thing that was on my head, and since I got the opportunity to say it now.
30 seconds.
So I think, we were supposed actually to talk about the adaptation, but there was one part that was not really mentioned much was related to climate change, are the extreme events, which actually have a huge impact on the society and a human, etc. So this was perhaps one part that we did not focus that much here, and there one starts to think about what are the ways of preventing or minimizing the risks of extreme events.
Yeah, thank you for bringing this up. I think, in fact, they were discussed, but not enough. I was going to mention them in a wrap-up. Namely, you were speaking about shock therapy, and Alf was speaking extensively about the heat waves that, in particular, the sea has, the marine and aquatic realm has experienced in the last few years, and the impacts have been extreme as well. So thank you for bringing that up. Did you, Stina, have some really brief views, or are you okay with things?
Maybe adaptation, yes. In agriculture, we are doing that all the time, I think. For example, in East Africa, it has been very dry, so then we have to think of how to adapt to those conditions and so on. But we didn't bring it up, I think, especially.